So I'm excited to talk about that. But first, Dr. El-Sayed, I have a quick question because let's just get it out of the way. It's a fast one. Folks had asked you to put out your financial disclosures, right? And there's a reporting that you indeed did that. I saw them. Looks good. But your opponent seems to think that you didn't put it out there. So let's just put that right out there.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're taking $60 million in outside spending, setting a record in terms of the amount of money spent against your primary opponent, you want anything you can to distract. And, so this was the thing that she wanted to use to distract. At the end of the day, my wife, her family inherited land in India where they immigrated from, and put it in their kids' names, and then sold it this year. Which terrible timing, but they sold it this year. And so, getting financial information in from India is not the easiest thing to do, and so it slowed down the process. We didn't break any of the rules. We took the same extension on our paperwork that the congresswoman has taken
Hmm.
in every year that she's been in Congress. So it's a little rich now to start to try and point fingers to do for somebody who did the same thing you've done. But the big question really when it comes to money and transparency is who's funding these campaigns. So we know about half of the 60 million is coming from UDP Direct. UDP is APAC Shell PAC, or APAC's, it's Shell Super
United
PAC.
Democracy Project. So that
Right.
people see.
Yep, United Democracy Project, $30 million in outside spending there. And then there's these other really shady organizations. One is the Center for Democratic Priorities, which didn't exist before it started to run ads for my opponent. The other one is this group called Center Forward, which apparently paid for a trip for the congresswoman and her mother to go to Portugal to talk to whom, I'm not sure, to talk about what, I don't know. But in the end, they're a huge spender in this race. And then they disclose their funds, and all their funds were brought forward from 501c4 organizations, which can hide
Mhm.
their donors. So it's like this sort of Russian nesting doll situation of outside spending, all to obscure the fact that this is a candidate who has taken money from all of the worst corporations and has spent the last 8 years in Congress doing their bidding instead of ours. And so, I think if we want to talk about money and transparency, there's plenty to talk about that has to do with why $60 million can come into our elections to set a record in the amount of money that is spent against one candidate. And that tells
Right.
you about where I stand. I don't take corporate money. I never have, never will. And that's why the corporations in APAC want to destroy me.
Well, thank you for putting that trust. And just to be clear with folks, I understand your tax documents have been disclosed as well publicly.
My tax
Good.
documents are out there, right? And
Yeah.
and so look at it is a frustrating factotum of our politics that there's a lot when you have a lot of money coming in that you can use to uh, distract people from the foundational issues at play. And
Right.
that's sort of where we are. But
It is.
you've done this. You know what it's like to go up against APAC. You know how
Yeah.
they play. You know how they distract. And here we are.
Yeah. APEC is impressive at times, but getting in terms of their results, right? But their results are not good this round. So let's watch that closely.
Well, I got to
Th-
say, because of folks like you who've been telling that story for a very long time. I mean, I think they've been able to go under the radar, and I think in this moment, people are asking, why is our country funding a genocidal foreign government billions of dollars when we've watched live and living color the carnage they've created? Well, that money should be spent here on us to do things
right.
like build our schools and provide healthcare here. Why is that happening? And I think the reality of it is that because APAC can spend so much money just trucking people in races who are willing to stand up to them, we end up having a bipartisan consensus on the single issue least important to voters, most important to them, which is we send our money to a foreign government. We allow a foreign government to dictate our foreign policy to us. We can do a lot better, but you've done that work, and they came for you, and you stood up to them. And anything we're doing in this race is a function of people who've come before us to do that. So I just want to give you your flowers and thank you for your courage.
Well, it's a team effort, right? We all get in there and do what we can, and hopefully, we get results along the way. And we certainly are this election cycle. Um, so I do want to go to healthcare, Dr. El Sayed. Tell us a little bit. So obviously, you've been a public health official, so it makes an abundance of um, reason for choosing Medicare for all. But tell us specifically in your Medicare for all platform how you would manage this the way you would want to see it executed.
Yeah. So what Medicare for All is for folks who don't know, imagine you have your private health insurance card in your pocket. That private health insurance card, you have to pay about $1,000 to $2,000 a month. Your employer pays some proportion of that. You have a deductible, which is the money you have to pay to get the health care you thought you already paid for. And then you have a copay and coinsurance. And
Mhm,
then if you lose your job, you lose that card. What Medicare for All would be is a card that you get the day you're born that doesn't expire until the day you expire, God willing, at 120, yeah, after a long, healthy life, peacefully in your sleep. And it doesn't go away if you turn 26, doesn't go away if you get a job or lose a job or turn 65 or get married or get divorced.
mhm,
And it is there for you with no out of pocket costs, no copay, no deductible, and is there for you anywhere you need to get your care. That's what we're talking about here. And the question ultimately is, how do you transition away from a private health insurance? But that's actually kind of a misnomer. 60% of the costs in healthcare in this country are paid for by the federal government, either through Medicare or Medicaid or the VA.
mhm.
And so we're not really transitioning the whole healthcare system. We're transitioning the remaining 40%.
Right.
And so the way that I'd like to see it done is that we immediately give it to kids and
Mhm,
we bring it down to the age of 60 after having made Medicare itself whole. What some folks don't realize about Medicare is that we've allowed it to become balkanized by the power of the health insurance lobby to do that.
mhm,
So it doesn't cover vision, dental, and hearing. You have this Part D, which is prescription drugs. You have a premium copay deductible. So you make the whole thing whole first for people over 65. Then you extend
mhm.
it for kids. Then you extend it down about 10 years every year until you've covered everybody. Like that'd be the approach that you take. I also think that there's an opportunity to bring current Medicaid into the mix. So you bring states and the infrastructure that they have to manage Medicaid into it. So you're not just centrally managing it from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which run Medicare right now, but you
Mhm.
actually get state Medicaid involved so that they can offer support in terms of helping to manage that transition on their own terms. Because of course, one of the things you would not need anymore if you had Medicare for all is Medicaid, right? Medicaid exists to provide health insurance for low income folks, and so they would be covered on Medicare. And so what happens is, as that transition happens, you can leverage some of that infrastructure at the state level as well to start providing. There's also an alternative approach where you engage with the states that want to do it first, and
Mhm.
you can bring them in to help to manage the infrastructure, the billing, et cetera, of it, and so you can transition some of that infrastructure. So there's different ways you could do it, but the key thing that we need right now is just the political will to do it. That's what we
Right.
don't have and have not had, in large part because of the same spending that those corporations drive into our system.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, folks, the money that we have spent on this war of choice that Trump and Hegseth are executing, we could have put this together and migrated everybody over with no unemployment attached to that maneuver and a bunch of things. So let's be clear on that. And thank you for that explanation because everybody looks at it a little differently. So, folks, just as a reminder, ask your candidates how they would execute Medicare for all. It's important. We need people that know what they're doing in this spot. So let's move on to one final topic. Money in politics, I'm gonna touch back on you laid out the, problem beautifully, that this race has 50 million going into it from these, toxic groups attached to APAC and a bunch of things. Now we need to talk solution, right? What would your top 3 solutions to, money in politics be? It can be current legislation or something that you've divined yourself.
So I think we need to end Citizens United. That, of course, sits with the Supreme Court, and that's a whole different ball of wax. But I do think we need explicit legislation to end Citizens United. Now, I also tell you that I think there are belts and suspenders. The argument for Citizens United is that the Supreme Court has interpreted the First Amendment to cover money as speech, and the 14th Amendment to cover corporations as people, which of course is absurd, but that's where the current precedent sits. So if they were to reinterpret it the same way, you need suspenders. And to me, the suspenders look like mandatory public funding that flows into elections counterposed to any corporate funding that comes in. So if a corporate PAC decides to shell $10 million, the opposing candidate in that race, or all the opposing candidates in that race, it's the same amount of spending in turn. It would send all of the outside spending to zero because, of course, there would be zero incentive for anyone to spend. I also think that what we can do in the Democratic Party is unilaterally end this kind of money being spent in our primaries. Right? This is a Democratic primary in the end, and there's a lot that we could do as Democrats to set rules for our own primaries to say, look, in Democratic primaries, we're not going to allow this kind of money to be spent. And yet we don't, which tells you some of the structural failures of the Democratic Party. So I think those three things are going to be absolutely critical immediately. And then also, when you look at the biggest spender, APAC, let's be clear, like this is a super PAC that is interested in one thing and one thing alone, aligning our foreign policy to the interests of a foreign government. And I think it's just really important for us to be thinking about whether or not that kind of thing should be legal. Because ask yourself how we would feel if it was any other country. If there was
Right.
any other country whose interests should come before the interests of the United States government, and there was that much money being spent in Democratic primaries, for example, to try and dictate who should win based on that question. So I think there are added questions about whether or not super PAC should be able to lobby on behalf of the interests of foreign government in the first place.
Right. Indeed. Well, that's our time today. Dr. El Sayed, thank you so much and stay safe on the trail and we'll be watching for your news.
Thank you so much, Maria. I really appreciate you. Grateful for you and your leadership.
Okay, take care.